Welcome to PaulSeries, where your love and support inspire everything we do. We just want to take a moment to thank you, our amazing viewers. It's your likes, your subscriptions, your comments, and your incredible encouragement that motivate us to keep creating and sharing these stories.
The baby is a girl. Wendy gently washed, cleaned, and wrapped her in a towel. As she approached Sarah, exhausted from labor, Sarah weakly carried the baby in her arms with a gently smile and then asked Wendy to hold the baby for a while. Wendy cradled the newborn and walked over to Paul, who was leaning against the garage wall. "You have a daughter," Wendy said softly, a bittersweet smile on her face. "You're finally fulfilling our dream of having 2 daughters." Her voice trembled as she continued, "I know our dream didn't come true for us, but I'm happy for you, Paul." Wendy gently placed the baby in Paul's arms. With one last glance at Paul and the baby, Wendy turned and walked away, disappearing into the distance. Paul watched her go, his heart heavy with emotion, knowing he would never see Wendy again. The joy of welcoming baby Queen into the world was a shared dream for Paul and Sarah. From the moment she was born, she became the center of their universe. Paul was a doting father, always ready with a bottle in the middle of the night, or to sing her to sleep with gentle lullabies. Sarah, despite her initial anger over the Wendy incident, poured her love into raising Queen, determined to provide her with the best childhood possible. As the years passed, Queen grew into a bright and cheerful little girl. Her laughter filled the house, softening even the heaviest tensions between Paul and Sarah. Family moments, like Queen's first steps, her adorable mispronunciations of words, and her love for bedtime stories, offered glimpses of hope that their marriage could endure. But behind the smiles they shared as parents, cracks began to form in their relationship. Paul's love for Queen was undeniable, but he struggled to fully invest in his marriage with Sarah. Late at night, when the house was silent, Sarah often caught Paul staring at Wendy's portrait, which still hung in their home as a memorial to the woman he thought he'd lost. By the time Queen turned 4, the growing emotional distance between Paul and Sarah became impossible to ignore. Their once frequent conversations had dwindled to strained exchanges, and the shared warmth they felt as a couple was replaced by a quiet, unspoken resentment. The morning sunlight poured into the dining room, bathing the space in a warm, golden hue. Paul sat at the head of the table, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His gaze lingered on the wall opposite him, where Wendy's memorial portrait hung, a symbol of his once unshakable grief. Sarah entered the room, her footsteps sharp against the tiled floor. She set her own mug on the table with a deliberate clink, breaking the silence. Her eyes followed Paul's line of sight, and her lips pressed into a thin line. Still staring at her picture, she asked, her voice low but edged with irritation, "You've been doing that for days, Paul?" Paul didn't look away from the portrait. "It's not just a picture, Sarah," he said softly. "It's everything I thought I lost. And what about me?" Sarah shot back, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "What do I mean to you now?" Paul turned to her then, his expression a mix of guilt and weariness. "Sarah, you know this isn't about you. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't know Wendy was alive." Sarah let out a bitter laugh, throwing her hands up in disbelief. "Oh, so that makes it okay? She just waltzes back into your life, and suddenly I'm invisible." "That's not fair," Paul replied, his voice growing firmer. "You knew how much I loved her. I thought she was dead for years. Do you know what it's like to grieve someone who isn't really gone?" Sarah's eyes narrowed, her frustration hardening into anger. "And do you know what it's like to live with someone who doesn't see you anymore? To feel like a placeholder for someone else's ghost?" Paul flinched at her words, but didn't respond. He couldn't. Sarah began pacing, her movements sharp and restless. "You can't have it both ways, Paul. You need to make a choice. Her or me. Don't put me in that position, Sarah," Paul said, his voice cracking. "It's not about choosing. It's about trying to make sense of everything." "Stop lying to yourself," Sarah snapped. "You've already made your choice. You just don't have the courage to admit it." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with a sharp intake of breath, Sarah grabbed her coat from the back of a chair. "I'm done talking, Paul," she said coldly. "If you want her, have her. But don't expect me to wait around while you figure out your feelings." Paul reached for her, desperation flickering in his eyes. "Sarah, please." But she pulled away, her movements brisk and decisive. Without another word, she stormed out of the room, the front door slamming shut behind her. Paul stood there for a long moment, the echoes of the door slam fading into silence. Slowly, he sank back into his chair, his eyes returning to Wendy's portrait on the wall. Memories flooded his mind, of grieving her, of clutching their wedding photo, of nights spent staring at the ceiling while Sarah sat silently by his side. Now, that silence was all he had left. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. Sarah's absence was palpable, her belongings slowly disappearing from their shared space. The breaking point came on a rainy evening, during a heated argument that had been building for months. Sarah accused Paul of never fully committing to their marriage, while Paul admitted that he still carried a piece of Wendy in his heart. The admission shattered any hope Sarah had of rebuilding their bond. Realizing that their relationship was no longer sustainable, they made the painful decision to separate. For Queen's sake, they agreed to co-parent amicably, but the love they had once shared was now irreparably broken. As Sarah packed her things and moved out, Queen clung to Paul, confused by the changes happening around her. Paul, now a single father, was left to navigate the challenges of raising a young child while grappling with the lingering feelings he had for Wendy. Each morning whenever Queen goes to school, the emptiness of the house became unbearable. Paul grabbed his coat and stepped outside, letting his feet carry him aimlessly. He found himself at the park, their park, the one he used to visit with Wendy. He sat on a bench, staring at the families and couples around him. The weight of his choices, his losses, pressed down on him. He closed his eyes, little did he know, the past was about to resurface in ways he never expected. One sunny Saturday at the ice cream park, filled with the laughter of children and the sweet scent of waffle cones. Paul, a single father, was having a wonderful time with his daughter, Queen, now 8 years of age. They played games, rode the carousel, and savored their favorite ice cream flavors. As Paul bent down to pick up his keys that dropped, a woman accidentally collided with him. Apologetic, Paul turned to face her, and his eyes widened in surprise. "Wendy," he exclaimed, stunned. Wendy's eyes locked onto his, a mix of surprise and caution on her face. "Paul," she replied softly. As they stood there, Paul's mind rushed back to their past, the memories they shared, and the love they once had. He felt a pang of regret and longing. Queen, sensing her father's distraction, tugged on his hand. "Daddy, who's that?" she asked curiously. Paul smiled, trying to compose himself. "This is an old friend, sweetie. Wendy." Wendy's face lit up with a warm smile as she greeted Queen. As they chatted, Paul couldn't help but notice the way Wendy's eyes sparkled when she laughed, the way her hair fell in loose waves down her back. The connection between them still felt palpable, and Paul wondered if maybe, just maybe, they could rekindle what they once had. They shared a heartfelt conversation, catching up on each other's lives. As they talked, they both glanced at their wrists, surprised to see they still wore the bracelets with their names engraved. "Why has life been so unfair to us?" Paul asked, his voice tinged with regret. "We were once lovers, I lost you, and now I've found you again." Wendy's eyes locked onto his, and she smiled. As they introduced themselves to Queen, Paul said, "This is my daughter." "Queen?" Wendy's eyes widened. "She's beautiful." As they continued talking, Wendy mentioned she had a daughter too. Paul's heart skipped a beat, wondering if she was married. "What's her name?" Paul asked, trying to sound casual. "Mandy," Wendy replied. "And she's yours, Paul." Paul's eyes widened in shock, and then a huge smile spread across his face. "Really?" Wendy nodded. "The intimacy we shared that day in the garage. Mandy was the result." Paul's heart soared. He felt like he'd been given a second chance. As they sat together, Paul's eyes widened with wonder as he gazed at Mandy. "You look just like your mom," he exclaimed, his voice filled with emotion. Mandy smiled, unaware of the depth of her father's feelings. Paul's heart swelled with love and gratitude as he looked at his two daughters, Queen and Mandy. Wendy smiled, her eyes shining with happiness. "We're finally living our dream, Paul," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Paul nodded, his eyes locked onto Wendy's. "We always wanted two daughters, and now we have them. And we're here at the ice cream park just like we always imagined." As they licked their ice cream together, the four of them, Paul, Wendy, Queen, and Mandy, shared a moment of perfect happiness, savoring the sweetness of their reunion and the fulfillment of their long-held dream. Months went by, and Paul worked tirelessly to rebuild trust with Wendy, Queen, and Mandy. He proved his devotion through small gestures and grand romantic surprises, embracing his role as a father to both Queen and Mandy and a partner to Wendy. Gradually, they fell back into a rhythm of love and partnership. One evening, Paul took Wendy on a surprise date to the same ice cream park where they reunited. As they strolled hand in hand, Paul led her to a picturesque spot overlooking the park. He stopped, took a deep breath, and dropped to one knee. "Wendy, from the moment I met you, I knew you were the one for me. We've been through ups and downs, but our love has only grown stronger. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." Paul pulled out a small box, revealing a stunning diamond ring. "Will you marry me, Wendy?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. Tears of joy streaming down her face, Wendy nodded eagerly. "Yes, yes, a million times yes." Paul slid the ring onto her finger, and they shared a passionate kiss as the sun set behind them. Paul and Wendy's story reminds us that true love can conquer all. Through life's ups and downs, they held on to each other. Today, surrounded by love and family, they show us that happily ever after is possible. It's the laughter, tears, and quiet moments that make life worth living. Their love teaches us that family is the anchor that holds us together. Let us remember to cherish and honor one another. May their love inspire us to create our own happily ever after. Love is the greatest gift we can give and receive. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming content. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video.